Welcome back to Generation Influence, a new podcast that goes behind the scenes to talk to the marketers and leaders driving the influencer marketing and e-commerce space. I'm your host, Bill Hildebolt, and I'm the co-founder of gen.video, a platform in the space. Today's guest is Amber Stepper, a leader with experience across e-commerce, durable goods, services, and agency. It's a wide-ranging career, and so we've got lots to cover today, but let's start at the beginning. Amber, welcome. What inspired you to pursue a career in marketing?
Well, I guess for that question, I'd have to go back to the very beginning, but it really was the start on the agency side. And as I was in the midst of agency life, and I wasn't necessarily doing the marketing and strategy at that time, I was on the program management side, but I would look and see all the great work that the planners were doing with the clients and, seeing these big campaigns come to life. And it sort of drew me in. And I knew that eventually I wanted to kind of migrate over to more of the marketing side because I really enjoyed understanding what drove behavior, what consumers wanted. My whole career has been primarily on the B2C side with consumer brands. And I loved working on brands that I, as a consumer, interacted with. So a lot of it was really about, they say sort of like do what you love and you gravitate towards what comes naturally to you. And I've sort of married that together in the jobs that I've taken on the marketing side through each different sort of stage of life. Obviously, most recently working with a baby and kid company, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's really fun to market to consumers that you can sort of find similarities with and intuitively know what motivates them beyond just the academic understanding.
I love that idea. I love that introduction. I mean, one of the things we've been talking a bit in the podcast about is marrying of your passions with a professional career. And so finding things in your business life that resonate with you personally. And I feel like that's very much on trend. And so I'm glad we're going to get to explore that further with you today. Before we jump too deep into the career track, and again, I think we'll definitely end up spending some time talking about baby marketing, given all that you've done in your career. But I noticed you've been a speaker for women in business for almost a decade. So you've really put yourself out there publicly. What inspired you to get out there and do that? What benefits do you feel like you've gotten out of that above and beyond? Presumably, hopefully it's brought some like awareness to you and visibility, which is great, but have there been other benefits? And most importantly, what makes for a good panel or presentation? In other words, I need your help. I need some crib notes. What's going to make this interview successful?
Yeah, it's so funny, to think about the speaking piece, because to be perfectly honest, it was not something that, I'd done my whole career, and I wasn't totally comfortable doing it when I first started. And I definitely pushed myself to do it because I would say when I started at National Amusements, for example, there were a lot of industry conferences. And so I would be attending them both in the industry or just marketing conferences. And I started to think, well, if I'm going to go, I'd love to participate. And so I started asking, are there opportunities to speak on a panel or to get involved? So I'd sort of have the best of both. And it really was, especially coming into the entertainment industry, in which people were there very long-standing, 20, 30 years. It was a good way for me to meet new people and to understand my competitors' businesses better, and just to become a more active participant in the industry landscape. So that was some of my primary motivation, specifically around women in business. I also love taking in information in those settings. And so, of course, I just wanted to give back and to contribute. And anytime that I was, asked to do that, like I recently spoke at my high school to their, on a small scale, to their business club and things like that. And so it's nice to feel like you're kind of coming after a couple decades of work experience to maybe be able to add something to the conversation. And even if they take away one, salient point, that's great. And it's just, I love meeting people. And so it's always a great way to meet new people and create new relationships that often last, well beyond the event itself.
That's awesome. That's great. I heard a little bit of get out of your comfort zone, but then I also heard that it really has resonated for you and in some ways finding yourself through those activities. I had to laugh. I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed back in my high school, so that one might be foreclosed to me.
I
But
know
okay.
it was the first time I'd been there in a long time. And, to your point about what makes the panel good or the discussion good, I think it's all about diversity of experience, having people that are coming at the topic from a range of different angles, and striking the right balance between letting the panel drive the conversation and then, bringing it back to the topic and really driving some of the hot topics or questions that are really relevant currently, that may, evoke a wide range of responses is ideal.
Yeah, that's so good. It's so easy to get locked into, well, I do it this way. I've always done it this way. This is the only way to do it. And you have to find ways to break those patterns. So, all right, that's awesome. Well, the big thing that jumps out, again, you started in agency life. What a sort of classic way to get into the marketing world and then to find your way, out of that into the parts of the broader marketing landscape that inspires you, right? Some time and services, maybe we'll jump back to that, because I always think it's interesting when you've marketed in such different industries, what are the things you can take away and how do you learn to be flexible? But let's go to the core. Obviously the part where maybe to an extent you really grew up was your job at Good Baby, which is the parent of Evenflo, and one of the key players in the very competitive baby gear space. It sounds like, if I'm reading the LinkedIn notes correctly, it was a bit of a turnaround story. Tell us, what were the key things you focused on to get the brand and company going in the right direction, and how did that play out? That sounds interesting, fun, but challenging all at the same time.
Yes, yeah, it was a really great project and challenge. And so a little bit of backstory, Evenflo is a 100-year-old brand, a very sort of iconic American brand. It was founded in 1920, and it operated out of Ohio. It's done a range of different things, starting with feeding in the baby space, migrating into sort of baby gear. In the early 2000s, it was acquired by private equity. And for a number of years, it was owned by private equity, and different pieces of the business were sold off. The brand was not necessarily developed per se, and it became, to many consumers, had a large bricks and mortar distribution at Walmart, but it was sort of the less expensive value option on the shelf. And, thus it was a race to the bottom. The margins, were really low. Their marketing really wasn't there. And so it was sold to Good Baby. And Good Baby is the largest stroller manufacturer in the world, also entrepreneur founded. So they have a huge business in China, and they were looking to diversify their global portfolio. They at first tried to expand their GB brand, but that's very hard to do. So instead, they made a strategic acquisition in Europe with the Cybex brand, and they made a strategic acquisition in the US with Evenflo as an iconic American brand. So when my former CEO came in, he was tasked with really bringing the company to profitability and making the brand relevant again. And so as a compilation of new and existing leaders within the company, that was what we were tasked with. It was really, I was tasked with elevating the brand, and our product team was tasked with elevating the product portfolio so that they could go hand in hand and help build profitability into the business. So we really started from scratch in terms of defining what the brand meant and how we were going to portray it, and what the brand expression was going to be, how the creative was going to look, how we were going to show up in marketing channels, what we were going to look like on the shelf, and then tying that all into really new and innovative products that actually met consumer needs and we weren't just pumping out new products into the market all the time, which was sort of where the company had been prior to, because it was fully vertically integrated. So in many cases, the factory was like, we're going to do this and we're just pumping stuff into the market. And it wasn't necessarily the most consumer insights driven, product strategy, if you will. So that was a little bit of the background. And so we set on a course of a sort of 3 to 5 year plan of how we were going to get to that point. And it was, product development in a durable goods category takes a long time. It's very capitally intensive. It's a regulated industry. There's lots of testing. And so, you're not going to launch a product in 6 months. It's going to take, there's a long life cycle. So it does take many years to get to that point where you're starting to actually see the change happen. So we did sort of quick fixes and things that we could affect immediately upfront. And then the longer term investments in the brand started to take shape years out as we got to that kind of 3 to 5 year mark.
Wow. I mean, it is, it's amazing. It's so easy to imagine how that is going to be a multi-year process once you start, and a major, major commitment. I just have one question as you think about this. One of the dichotomies because I'm in the marketing industry, obviously, but I've never been a brand marketer per se. And so the perception is that consumers are very value sensitive, and I take that at face value, but I also find so many of my peers and maybe even my own behavior to be, yes, I'm value sensitive, except I will not compromise on, this. And for me, it tends to be anything I put in my body, anything I wear, my computer, my phone, right? Anything I touch, anything in my house. And then all of a sudden you go like, what do I drive? And then all of a sudden you go like, okay, I'm struggling to figure out the part where I'm a value shopper.
Yeah.
And I feel like baby is that on steroids, that, new parents are not going to compromise on anything anything to do with their newborn. And it's half fear and it's half like, this is what a good parent does. And so the idea of being a value brand in the durable baby care category, I mean, this is too strong a word, but it almost sounds oxymoronic to me. And so how did you guys think about that? Where did you decide to settle out where you've got to be value, but parents aren't going to compromise? How'd you think about that?
So what we realized was that there's a couple things. There's nuances to this consumer. So you're absolutely correct. And especially for first-time expectant parents, there is very little that they will not spend money on. Number one, because they have a lot of disposable income because they're first-time expectant parents and they have no children yet. Number two, they are also very concerned about making the right decision, and they gather information from all kinds of sources, and they're reading tons of reviews, and they want to make sure that whatever product it is, that's going to be the absolute, these are the first decisions they're making as parents. Ultimately, there's a lot of pressure to make the right decision. And so, of course, safety, things like that are just table stakes. And, in the car seat category, no matter what the price of the car seat is, they are all tested to the same standard. So none is, necessarily, consumers don't necessarily have visibility into that, but it is a regulated industry. So of course, everything has to pass and achieve the safety standards that are out there. So the way that the spending, it starts up here, highest, and it continues through about 18 to 24 months into the child's life. And then you've purchased most of what you need to purchase. It starts really dropping, right? You don't need as much. And then you start having more children. And then you're reusing things. And then you're realizing maybe I didn't need to spend as much on XYZ as I thought I did. Now I'm a sophisticated, experienced parent, and I know my way around this world. So that's where the value offering tends to come in, is in the multiple, child situation where I just need another booster seat, or, I'm looking for a playpen to take with me, to grandma's house or whatever. The life cycle of the parent sort of journey, we would peg it at about 7 years. So it is sort of relatively short. And then when you're out of that stage, you're completely out of that stage. So the highest value consumer to any brand in this space is the first time expectant parent, because they're going to spend the most. And that's, of course, when you're going to achieve brand loyalty. So Evenflo is actually doing really well further down the customer life cycle, but not as well getting that first time expectant. So where we realized that we needed to target, that value consumer, we didn't want to lose them. That was the sort of nuts and bolts of our business, but we needed to reposition the brand. So what we did is created a brand extension that would appeal to people with higher household incomes, that were seeking out more of a premium brand and a premium product experience. We kept Evenflo as the overall brand, and we did it as a premium line, and we only offered it D2C to start. So there was like technology built in. We up featured and offered, a whole new set of products to consumers, and we kept the sort of value business running because we knew that we didn't want to lose those consumers. And we developed that more of a mid-market offering. And then as that took hold and we began to relate to consumers and they started to say, oh, we will pay this price for an Evenflo branded product. We were able to kind of slowly work the bottom up to help meet that, get closer to that mid-market. So that was our strategy, because we knew if we just flipped the script and started, pricing our items 50% higher than what they had been priced, in the past necessarily, that we ran the risk of losing a lot of consumers that were loyal consumers and, purchasing, but they weren't necessarily the first time high value consumers that we were targeting and hoping to build brand loyalty and to maximize that kind of 7-year cycle.
That is amazing. Without naming names, we've done a lot of work in the diaper industry, and there are literally, the way the manufacturers in that space think is this premium brand is for the first child. And then they have the sister brands that are basically for kids 2, 3, and so on. And when you hear that, you're like, oh my God, that's great. So good to be a first child.
Kind of like how they say, there's all these pictures of the first baby and the second, third baby. They have like 5 pictures, it's just, things get they change,
Yeah, it is amazing. Oh my gosh. So great.
Not that number 2 and number 3 are loved any less.
That's right.
Things get busy and expensive. So
it's get expensive. It's so funny when you said the thing about, they have high disposable income. I'm like, wait, well, how do they have high disposable income? They're early in their, their careers. They're not making as much. And then you were like, because their expenses are lower. It was an expense comment, not an income comment. And I was like, right,
exactly.
Right. Oh my gosh. So great.
That was the backstory behind that.
That is, listen to the complexity that goes into that. Just thinking through that, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's daunting. And so then I got to ask the question, how did you use influencers? Influencers are huge in the baby space, but like kind of going through that depth of, okay, here's what we're strategically got going on, is obviously tough. And so one, was influencers a primary tactic, secondary tactic, like got to do it, but let's kind of hold it over here tactic? How'd you do that?
Evenflo was doing influencer marketing when I first started there, and we were working through an agency partner. And so what we would do is if we had a product launch, we would have influencer as part of it. I would say it was a secondary tactic. We would allocate a certain amount of funding to the campaign. The campaign would run, the influencers would get their product, they would post, and that would sort of be it. And that's where it was. Yep. And what we would see is that, the same influencers that were posting about our product X were then, 2 weeks later posting about product Y or stroller Y, or,
a competitor, not
a competitor.
yours.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we could have paid more to build in more exclusivity with influencers, et cetera. But it was, we didn't have that many disposable marketing dollars to use for influencer. And so I started to rethink the strategy. And what we ended up doing is bringing on an influencer strategist who the goal was at first for us to kind of infiltrate some of these mom groups, and in a very sort of organic way, because there's a big Facebook mom group community, start to kind of seed out awareness of Evenflo and some of these products. And then from there, we said, well, we'd really like to build a bench of brand, true brand ambassadors, people that we can work with over and over again, so that we have some more authenticity to our influencer marketing. Because yes, of course, we can have an influencer talk about our product and we can pay to have that, but it's not necessarily building credibility with consumers that this influencer actually is an advocate of our product, and they're seeing them use this product multiple times when they're out and about with their children, over the course of a year or a longer period, not necessarily, 3 posts over 3 months or whatever it might be. So we started down that path. And because we had the goods, we were able to do a lot in trade. And we were able to get really high value out of our influencer marketing and develop these kind of deeper relationships over time. So we did that. We developed, this roster that grew and grew, over 2 to 3 years. And then as we sort of graduated and began, looking for more higher level influencers, we started to layer on more pay to play, really sort of like more mid-level. We never got to macro. We weren't dealing in that level of budget, but we sort of plussed up that sort of bench of brand ambassadors with more prominent reach driving mid-level kind of tentpole ambassadors to layer on our steady Eddie bench of people that were always sort of there to continuously talk about our products across categories, so that we could actually say, like, there would be times we would ship a number of different products, to an influencer, and they would use them, in different ways over a period of time, but all under the Evenflo brand.
Got it. It sounds like you had this sort of ambassador meets product placement strategy. So we're not asking you necessarily to do a dedicated post, or maybe, you do that once, but then what we want to see is just the content present day to day and, in all your posts, and we'll pay you in a more longitudinal, or even just like provide you free product. I don't know which it was, but
yeah, it was a combination, but we definitely leveraged the product, to deliver value to the influencers outside of just monetary payment.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other thing one of the things that, because we've done a lot of work at gen.video in the baby category, the trick is the kids are always growing up, and you're at a different point of time in the, you're a parent forever, but you're not always changing diapers. And so,
right.
And so did you have a challenge that you had to be continuously refreshing that bench, not just because people would move on in terms of maybe the kind of content they wanted to do, or they're being an influencer, but because they were aging out? Did you have that issue, or did it not go long enough to where that became a challenge?
We did start to have that issue, but then we also had kind of most often people were having multiple kids. So even if sort of kid number 1 was aging out, kid number 2 was coming along, and we often tried to show extended use was a big message across product, because that's you get a lot of value, going back to how do you deliver value? It's like extended use is a way to deliver a lot of value. So we liked to show multi-child families where they had, let's say, a car seat, and a bigger kid was using it in this way, and a smaller child was using it in this way, and they could have, let's say, multiple car seats, or we had a lot of double strollers and things like that, or a wagon product, and you could show multi-use. So even if child number 1 necessarily was beyond that phase, there might be a child 2 or child 3. So we hadn't really maxed that out yet. But yes, of course, it's like we were always trying to bring new people in who could had newer, younger children, little babies, and the age range for some of the products was also, or what we wanted to show in terms of feature X is for a child of this size, so it would get very specific. And,
Wow.
our team finding the right influencers, they really had to dig in to exactly what we were looking for. And then, of course, not only did the child have to meet the specifications, but we had specifications about who we wanted to show. And, we wanted to have diversity, and we wanted to have diversity of location, and we wanted to have diversity of culture. And we wanted to make sure that who we were using as influencers was really representative of who we believed our consumers to be, so that we were reflecting that back. So it's that, with all influencer marketing, I think it can be challenging to find the right match, but those were some of the challenges that we faced in finding the right match.
Yeah. Now, you were there from 2017 to 2022. That was during the time frame you were there, really the explosion. Obviously, we can go back further and haul videos and things like that. And, prior to 2017, but that was a real golden age of sort of influencer marketing exploding from what people thought was a fad to all of a sudden like, oh no, it's not a fad. This is changing marketing. So you lived it at your time at Evenflo. Did you ever get to the point, and I think it could be tricky in this industry because of all the regulations that were you ever able to get to the point where you were repurposing the content that the influencers were generating into your own e-commerce assets or social assets, or was it really still letting it live on the influencer social channels and sort of relying on their reach to get the message out?
We did. A lot of it relied on their reach, but we definitely did work to incorporate it, even from, I don't know, I would say like around 2019 timeframe. We were doing, we would bring influencers in on photo shoots that we would be doing. We were really focused from a creative strategy standpoint on using real families. So a lot of times, of course, when you're shooting, you can have talent, and you're trying to put together a family that looks, like a real family, but we wanted to use actual real families, like real parents with their actual kids. We felt we got the best photographic and video content from that. So a natural, very easy way to do that was to use influencers and their kids and to photograph them and to use them in our campaign assets. And then that therefore gave them content that they could share and tease up front. And then we were using them in the influencer campaign as well. So it had, multiple extensions. We didn't do that for every product launch, but there were certain, key product launches that we were able to kind of get it together to do that coordinating and getting, it's a lot easier to have talent, show up, and be available. It's a whole different thing to get influencer families there and with their kids, and there's lots going on, and some people have a day job, and it's a different ballgame. But we were with the help of our influencer strategist able to coordinate that at times and layer that into our campaign creation, which was really exciting to see. There was a whole next level that we aspired to get to, and we never quite got there. We were actually going to do it for the 100-year celebration, but then COVID hit that same year in 2020.
Yeah.
But what we wanted to do was start to bring in, as we've seen, many other brands do, but the actual stories of these influencers and their families and their affinities, and really start to build out and paint that picture of and more of like an affinity campaign and strategy. Like, this is the surfer family, and this is what they do, and this is how they use the wagon, and this is the family that lives in Brooklyn, and this is what they do, and this is how they use the products, and this is their whole story, and then extend that out obviously through their own channels as well. So we had visions. I would say we got it some of the way there, but there was, as you mentioned, this window of time was really what cemented influencer as, this was the launching pad for it. And, I just heard a recent statistic that said in 5 years, a large portion of the Super Bowl ads will be creator, driven
Wow.
content and things like that. And so, it does feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, it definitely, every time you think it's like, oh, this thing is trended and ending, it like goes one level deeper and beyond. So, and I love that. Oh, it's too bad that COVID hit at the moment where you're about to do that affinity, because that's the beauty of influencers, is showing products, translating a product for the audience, right? Is brands and brand marketers, right? We have a theory, we put a product out there, we think it's going to meet a need, but what's actually magical is, even if you're 80% right, there's always going to be the 20% that the user is going to figure out on their own and apply in their own way. And that's a big part of the magic, is having, having these influencers who's so good at that, who's so good at translating a product for their audience. And so, that would have been fun.
Yeah.
All right, well, I want to jump forward, because you then moved to Thrasio to help them grow in the baby category. And so we obviously want to talk about what you did there. But before we do that, I don't know that everybody in the audience is going to know about Thrasio and that type of company, which is in itself this phenomena that has grown up around the Amazon ecosystem. So can you do a brief tutorial about what that space is, who they are, and what attracted you to that model?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, so Thrasio sits in what is called the aggregator space. They're called, these types of companies are called aggregators. And what they do is they make strategic acquisitions of existing, it can be a one product company or a multi-product company, entrepreneur, driven, that has had success typically on Amazon or in the digital space. For example, I worked on a brand that had grown up primarily in the D2C space. But for the most part, it's brands that have had tremendous success and grown on the Amazon platform. And these acquisitions are then made. And what a company like Thrasio does is they apply, at Thrasio, they call it the conveyor belt. They put it through this conveyor belt of optimization to greatly accelerate the growth of these products and brands, and then launch new, obviously there's product development as part of it, launch new products, and then, subsequently grow these companies under the aggregator umbrella into more than what they were when they acquired them. And that can come from expansion on Amazon. It can come from expansion via omni-channel, like we were talking to Target and Amazon. Thrasio has expanded some of their brands to retail channels as well. So it's really about, taking a nugget that's working, a model that's working, that's digitally proven, and then taking it to the next level and growing it from there, using all the resources and processes and intel and insights that a company like Thrasio has about Amazon, and working within that platform and being, a very close partner with Amazon. And Amazon itself is motivated to help companies like Thrasio succeed, because it just brings, more value to the Amazon platform. And ultimately, Amazon is trying to grow and capture as many consumers as they possibly can. So Thrasio then serves as sort of an extension or an arm to help Amazon grow its business, with focus on these already successful companies and brands.
All right, so we got to dive in there. That's really what you said, was almost to me unexpected. And so I want to highlight that. I don't know if other people in the audience would have heard what I heard, but it was fascinating, because you said Amazon's motivated to see them succeed. But for those of us who still read the Wall Street Journal, and I don't read it in paper, but I read it online, I still read it. There's so many articles about how Amazon is competing with the people on the platform, even big brands, right? Like coming out, I don't know if they have their own private label strollers yet, but there they are, like everything, like diapers, for sure they have private label diapers. And so And so I was sort of curious as to how a Thrasio like survives and thrives in a world where if Amazon's trying to do private label or even, private label brands, and then you've got the big guys still out there existing and competing, right? Is that a space that stays viable for the long run? But you actually said something different. You said Amazon actually wants to see them succeed. So talk to me about that dynamic. Talk to me about like, who's on whose side, is a Thrasio a long-term viable model? Like, does it get squeezed in the middle of private label brands? How does this work? What's happening? Who's
I
working
mean,
with who?
I think a lot of it is TBD, right? I mean, Thrasio is only 3 years old. It had a meteoric rise, lots of investment, lots of people coming into the aggregator space. I wouldn't even deign to make a projection as to how and whether these businesses, what they look like long term. I do think that there will be a level setting, and I do think there's a place for the aggregators, because Amazon, as we're talking about creator economy, right? Amazon thrives when businesses are using Amazon to sell and to reach consumers. They need a constant inflow of new products coming onto the platform. They can't do it all themselves, right? Every product on Amazon is not going to be an Amazon product. That's just not viable. Are they going to look at sort of easily replicable, commoditized items and look to exploit that demand that will always be there, and try to enter that and maybe compete with direct sellers? Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like you would see your favorite product at Whole Foods. You would see your favorite product for a year. The next thing you knew, there'd be a 365 version of the product sitting right next to it on the shelf. And you'd say, oh, that kind of stinks for that company because now there's this cheaper version of it. I think that's what we're seeing. However, what makes a company like Thrasio different, and I think the next hurdle that they're, working to cross is they have, product developers on staff and innovation, so it's not going to be a commoditized product offering, and Amazon needs new innovative products on the platform to continue to move forward. So that's why I think there still will be that symbiotic relationship between Amazon and companies like Thrasio, because Thrasio can, drill in, or other companies like that, and work with entrepreneurs and give Amazon sellers a place to exit to as well. Not every Amazon entrepreneur or seller is poised to run a business at scale. They might be poised to run a $10 million business, but they might not have the skills nor the interest in growing that business to $100 million. That might
Right.
not, they might want to go start their next Amazon business or exit. And so it's like it provides a glide path to that. What's challenging is, at least what I saw during my time at Thrasio, is when you have so many businesses across so many categories, disparate categories, each with their own specific needs and regulations and, ways of operating and things like that, that can be difficult and challenging to do at scale. So if you have pet products, you have baby products, you have hair care products, you have cleaning products, you have coffee products, you have whatever, it's like, it can be a little bit challenging from a quality control, a legal standpoint, all of that. Whereas at Evenflo, for example, we were focused in one category. Compliance, quality control, legal were challenges at Evenflo, but they were focused on a certain finite, area of expertise. So I think what we'll see with aggregators is a honing in on categories, because they're going to need to have some economies of scale in terms of internal capabilities and processes, and kind of drill down and say, we're going to focus on categories, 1 through 5. And this is going to be sort of our sweet spot. We're not going to do everything in the kitchen sink, because it's just not sustainable from an internal, efficiencies perspective. It's very costly to staff that across multiple industries. no matter what.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, it's funny, not to age myself, but as I was coming into the workforce, like in the 90s, right, we were just at the final stage of dismantling all these conglomerates that had grown up in the 70s and the 80s. And the idea was, there was endless financial efficiencies by manufacturing anything and everything. But where we started this conversation was the unique nuances, especially of the baby category. And then you just multiply that. And so we're sort of, replicating those same, the same challenges. And so that strikes me as intuitively very sensible that you're right. These things are going to have to come up with category-based specialization to succeed. Otherwise, you start trying to apply the same rules across multiple industries, you're actually creating problems, not solving them. So
exactly. Thrasio sees themselves as a P&G, of the digital first sort of era, so, and that I think is really, you asked what drew me to it. I thought that concept, that model of a consumer goods company at scale, but with brands that had come forward and succeeded digitally first, and then translating that out into retail and kind of flipping the whole, what we perceive a P&G model, on its head, was really interesting. Because when we think, when I worked at Evenflo, we would talk to our target buyers, and they were really interested in us driving and proving that we could drive demand online for these products before they gave us the coveted store placement. So gone were the days of, oh, I like this, I see it in a line review, I'm going to put it in the store and I'm going to see how it does. Now we have the digital ecosystem, which can tell us in many ways how this product is going to perform or what the potential could be. And then it makes a lot more sense to put it in the store, because that it's sort of proven, and there's some history there, and you can show a pattern of growth or how you use marketing across different channels to actually drive consumers to this. And it's been tested and proven. And so that's the same model that Thrasio is based on, but just extrapolated out to a huge scale.
wow. So fascinating. One of the other interviews we've done in the podcast series, I'm just not sure if that one will go live before this one, so I won't mention it other than by generalities, but I'll try to tie the two together in some sort of liner notes. But it was a chief competitor of P&G's, and what he said in the interview was, we no longer see e-commerce as a separate channel. We see that, we have to think across all the channels simultaneously. So we are obviously omni-channel. We have to think about all the channels simultaneously, but we have to customize the approach for the channel that we're in at that moment. Even if it's the same product, it may be different packaging, it may be different marketing, it may be different this, or it may be the same, because we have to meet, one of his quotes was, we need to meet the consumer where they are. And so, so again, I'll try to tie this together for the listeners on the back end to compare, right? Like, if you're, I think there's a ton of appeal, a ton of intrinsic appeal to this idea of digital first, figure it out, lower barriers to entry, faster feedback, right? And then apply those lessons to see, is it going to work in the store, or, right, is being omni-channel an advantage or a disadvantage, right? So that is a great setup. Thank you for that. All right. So we've talked about Thrasio and the aggregators in general, if you will, and that was great. I learned a lot. But tell us, what were you doing there? What was your job? What was your goal? What was your role? And what did you achieve in what sounds, by the way, like a chaotic, challenging environment? You didn't say that. I'm going to say it for you. But anything that goes from, I'm pretty sure they're unicorn status, from 0 to $1 billion in 3 years. People hear that and they get excited. I hear that and I get terrified. So, so anyway, so I'm not putting words in your mouth, but
yeah, I mean, absolutely. They grew really fast. I think at one point, one of the HR people told me they were onboarding something like 50 people every 2 weeks or something. I mean, it was just at a pace that is hard for most people to imagine. I've never been, part of that before. So my role there was as a general manager. So, and that was also really appealing to me because I was able to manage all aspects of the business operation. So I was working with supply chain, I was working with product development and marketing, but it was expansive for me to go from just managing marketing capability to actually owning the full operation of the business, owning the P&L. So that was my role. My role was really to make sure that the operations were running smoothly, that we had product coming in, that what our projections were going to look like, how we were using marketing to drive sales, what our product development roadmap was shaping up to be, what was the time frame on that? How did we have a retail strategy? Were we going to try to push it to retail? That's a sort of a long lead thing, right? You have to wait for line reviews, you have to warm the relationship with the retailers, all of that takes time. So that was just kind of a cross section of some of what I was overseeing at Thrasio. And the brand that they acquired that really drove me joining was a flagship brand for them. It was the largest acquisition they had made.
Wow.
And it happened to be a baby brand. So it was a baby brand that had really grown and developed to a high level of revenue on D2C. And Thrasio saw a huge opportunity to exploit the Amazon side of that business that had been relatively untapped. So that was where we first, started conversations and were able to apply some of that industry knowledge.
That's really exciting. And so coming out of, Evenflo, were you like, whoa, how did this brand even get this far? All the regulations, everything as a pure D2C brand? Was there catching up to do there, or were they locked and loaded and it just kind of figured it all out as entrepreneurs? Because that's interesting.
Yeah. I'd say a little bit of both, a little bit of both. Some of it was locked and loaded, some of it was not. And, there were definitely some hiccups along the way in terms of, doing some retroactive work to bring things, fully in line. And there was definitely a bump between the entrepreneur acquisition. And of course, they were working with a third party, as were many of the brands that we managed at Thrasio, a third party supplier and, goods coming from China and, using external testing. And for the most part, it was okay. But I think every time we acquired a brand on the Thrasio side, there was some sort of level of not only due diligence, but just sort of right sizing, as you can imagine, from going from a fast and loose entrepreneurial environment into a big corporate entity. There was this intake that had to happen with all of our brands. So we did that across categories, whether it was baby, whether it was pet, whether it was skincare, everything. So it was always a case where it was mostly okay, but for our level of comfort, for our level of sort of compliance, we were almost always leveling those brands up to a higher level of quality control, just because the exposure was so significant. We sort of had to do that.
Yeah. Even as you're trying to run, frankly, probably even faster than they had been running, here you are also trying to lock things down. Scaling companies is fun.
No. And what I will say about Thrasio that was really, they were kind of, ahead of, where they were in terms of the life cycle of the company, the internal communications, the onboarding, the way that they communicated and rolled out processes and change within the company was like a well-oiled machine, super well organized, very clearly communicated, and they were able to mobilize and activate and pivot a huge amount of people in terms of the workforce and across capabilities to actually get things done very quickly. And it was impressive to see the ability to actually drive change and strategic initiatives through the organization in weeks, as opposed to like this is going to take us, 6 months to a year to be able to kind of make this turn, which is a challenge that you see in a lot of large organizations. But they were able to kind of hold on to that nugget of the startup mentality, even at scale. And it was really, I've never seen an organization be able to push things through as quickly as they were able to. So there's building blocks of, something that could long-term be a real differentiator. And a lot of what they were doing as well was building out, software solutions and things to be able to operate at more scale and faster and more intelligently. And I think that also will be a huge differentiator that will help them keep their leadership position in the space.
Oh, I would agree. The ability to mobilize a human SWAT team to go challenge, to go solve challenges. It's almost antithetical, frankly, to the way I'll say Silicon Valley wants things to run these days. Is let's just have the software take care of everything, which is great philosophy, but it's not actually the way the real world works in so many situations. And I think it's a problem. I think it's a conflict in the startup world, and which we definitely see in influencer marketing, right? Like every influencer marketing company that's gotten, VC funding is basically told, like, don't do any human intervention, make the client do everything, make it all self-service, could be a SaaS company. And, and even the way you were talking about, your experience at Evenflo, like you found success when you hired an in-house coordinator and you had them, organize the way you wanted things to happen and the way that fit your business and your industry, your individual model. It was not like, okay, well, the software we use, does this one thing, so we'll do that. That is not a recipe for success. So, okay, that's awesome. I would totally agree. That is a huge strength of Thrasio. In this environment, though, of like really moving fast, were you able to integrate influencers or was it too much? So, all right, so tell us about how did you use influencers to support the baby brand there?
Yeah, and we used influencers, across brands. I would say that there was a marketing team, there was an influencer marketing team in-house at Thrasio that had three sort of aspects to it. One was, securing influencers that were going to post on Instagram and TikTok. We also had Amazon creators who, were going live and working. And that was something that I had started working on when I was at Evenflo and already existed when I got to Thrasio, but because of the Thrasio integration with Amazon, certainly that, was appealing and something that they were looking to develop further. And then there was a whole affiliate branch, which sort of, attached on and was part of related to the influencer marketing that we did at Thrasio. And so I would say it was in its nascent stages in terms of influencer marketing at Thrasio, but it was definitely viewed and across categories as a important way to drive traffic, to drive awareness, to drive conversion. Thrasio is extremely metrics driven. So we did not put out an influencer campaign without a promo code, without a drive to Amazon. Everything was tied in, and we definitely saw lift. For example, we had a cleaning product. We saw tremendous lift, with certain influencers, and then we would, look to work with them again and re-engage them, because not only would we see huge amounts of follows to the social media presence, which most of the brands that we acquired did not have a large existing social media presence, because most of them were Amazon sort of specific brands. They weren't necessarily investing in developing the brand presence on organic social. So we were able to also leverage influencers to just build awareness of the brands. But the ultimate measure was at Thrasio of driving conversion. Everything was ROI based, and doesn't make sense for us to either keep working with this individual or keep using influencer as a channel for this specific product line or brand, because again, it was like such a range of product lines and brands. In some cases, it made a lot of sense. In some cases, it wasn't the most effective channel. So it was really a test and learn sort of environment at the time that I was there. And I'm sure, it's going to get more sophisticated over time. At Evenflo, we didn't have that level of analytics and tracking. We hadn't quite gotten there yet. We had just started to do some affiliate links and things like that, some promotional codes, but it was more about awareness driving, and how we measured the change in our brand was through brand tracking, and an increase in awareness and an increase in brand perception that we were able to gain from our sort of brand tracker. But it was, I would say, with influencer marketing, you're often always left wanting more because it's difficult to track. For example, purchases of baby products or any considered purchase, it's not always an immediate thing, right? It could go on a registry, or it can be purchased in 3 months' time or whatever. It's much different than the cleaning products I was mentioning that we were selling at Thrasio, where it's a low cost, almost an impulse purchase. And I tend to think you get a lot more out of analytics tracking on influencer marketing with items like that, just because it's much more immediate. The purchase cycle is much shorter.
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that gen.video specializes in, is the attribution and helping, especially omni-channel, multi-channel brands understand, which channel's kind of working, which influencers are working within which channel. And so one, I'm surprised and impressed that Thrasio had scaled up and was that sophisticated that quickly. Most companies aren't there, so I can't even say how long it takes most companies to get there. But the challenge is, right, if you have a durable good, right, you really can. And new first-time parents, I mean, baby's a great category for influencer because, as you said, the first-time parents, they're reading all the reviews, they're looking for that external validation, they're trying to figure it out. And, they will click links and they will go down funnel and they'll do their research. At the same time, though, that doesn't mean they're going to make a multi-$100 purchase within a, 24-hour or whatever, attribution window you may have. So one of the things we've figured out with durable goods is you actually have to wait. And sometimes it's beyond the scope of a campaign. So we think of a campaign as, 3 months, or maybe 3 months, maybe even as short as 1 month. You may not see the results in that time frame. You may have to go back 6 months later. And that's where you will see, oh my gosh, I drove all these sales and conversions. Is, either the initial traffic kind of seasoned in, came back, made a purchase, or even you seasoned into SEO. And then the problem on the shorter term stuff is, a lot of times on those impulse purchases, either one, they'll click the link, but they will check out somewhere else. They'll go to a different channel. Or it's not a large enough. So really understanding how to read the tea leaves. It is not you pay, an influencer $10 and you get $1,000 in sales. It doesn't really work like that. So, but it's interesting. So you've definitely seen it all. And that's phenomenal. So, the ability to operate in that nuanced environment is phenomenal. All right. So as we wind down toward the end, what are you most excited about that's emerging either directly in e-commerce, or if you want to go more broadly into digital marketing overall, what is it you can't wait to get your hands on in the space?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll join the chorus. It's everywhere. Everything is everywhere with this, but it's the ability of AI to scale. I mean, one of our biggest challenges at Evenflo, at Thrasio, is creating content at scale. There are things that are sort of, from an e-com perspective, repeatable and formulaic. And I think the concept that there can be, we set up a production team in China just as I was leaving Evenflo to help scale, our creative team so that we could photograph things there and, do more production oriented work at scale. And that's been my whole career. I started my agency career at Digitas, and we were working with offshore teams to service the General Motors business. And it was always like, what is the right combination of production and strategic and conceptual creative and, more production oriented creative. And when you look at, I should say also Thrasio, takes the Amazon ecosystem and the Amazon listing and optimizing that to a whole new level. It certainly was an education for me going from Evenflo into that environment in terms of how you move the needle and why product A is selling so much better than product B, and all the different pieces from paid to organic that go into making that happen. They were tracking sales on an hourly basis, just to give you an idea of the level of granularity. So when I think about, servicing businesses like that, and e-com obviously is already huge, it's only going to get bigger and bigger. It's sort of, how can AI help act as a resource to perform, some of that work and free up more resource to actually do the brand storytelling and the campaign, create more interesting campaigns, and creative, whether that's with influencers and creators, dedicating more dollars to that versus dedicating more dollars to just, getting the work done and keeping the lights on from an e-commerce perspective, I think is really exciting. So it's great to see, every day we wake up and there's something new that AI, can do today, and we'll see how that manifests over the course of, the next months and years. But it certainly seems like there's going to be a role that it can play. And I think that's a major milestone in marketing overall, and especially for e-commerce, just because scaling, the ability to have your brand's presence optimized on e-commerce can be very labor intensive, and it's all about, testing and learning and optimizing. And if AI can help you do that in a more efficient way, I think that would be a game changer for small and large companies, small companies that really don't have the resources, period, and large companies that want to be able to do it in a bigger way across larger portfolios of products.
Oh, I love that answer. It's I think there's all this fear and trepidation that, that AI is coming for our jobs. And I fully appreciate the perspective that it seems different this time. But again, I think you look back at history, right? 150 years ago, 99% of the population was farmers, and then manufacturing. We moved into manufacturing, and it's like, oh, here comes automated manufacturing. And then, there's transition after transition. And every time, when people see a transition coming, they think, oh, this is the end. We're all going to be out of work. But all it does is all the tools, all they do is create the opportunity for us to do more value-added things. And I think the same thing is going to be true of AI. There will always be a place for sort of human creativity and going on to the next thing, and to do work that we can't even imagine today. So yeah. I love that answer. All right. Well, Amber, this has been phenomenal. I learned so much from you, as I'm sure the audience did as well.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate you having you come on board. Any last words of wisdom or advice for us?
I don't think so. I think that's it. I think that's my well of wisdom for the day, but this has been absolutely great. And, I love the work that you guys do at gen.video. And I think we touched on it briefly, but, the concept of bringing in the influencer creative, into the marketing creative and tracking and all of that stuff is so great. And so kudos to you guys for, continuing to develop and put forth a great product. And I just really appreciate you guys having me on here. So thank you so much.
The thanks is all yours. All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Generation Influence drop every Wednesday. So be sure to subscribe to listen on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Next week's guest is Austin Ratner from Nike. Hear how he found his way to his dream job and what it's like to do performance marketing at one of the best brand marketing companies in the world. Hope to see you there.